to welcome you to the Curatorial Roundtable today. Our guest is Daniela Ziman, and I'm just going to read a short bio for Daniela. Daniela will have 50 minutes for her presentation. At that time, at the bottom of your screen for the Q&A, you can ask a question. I'll read those questions aloud, and we'll, answer those, and that will be the webinar. The Curatorial Roundtable is part of the MA Curatorial Practice program here at the School of Visual Arts in New York, a 2-year master's program in every aspect of professional curating. And the Roundtable, which has been now going on for more than a decade, brings distinguished directors and curators to the public to speak about exhibitions that have been important for them in their own work. And so with that, I'm going to read this brief bio of Daniela. Of course, there's much more than this, but this is a summary. Daniela Ziman is a Vienna-based writer, curator, and the artistic director of TBA 21, Thyssen-Bornemisza Art Contemporary, based in Madrid. Since the foundation of TBA 21 in 2003, Daniela has played a central role in shaping its program, curating over 50 exhibitions and contributing extensively to its publishing and commissioning initiatives. Her curatorial practice is rooted in material culture, artistic research, and ecological and post-disciplinary knowledge forms. Daniela consistently engages with alternative epistemologies and speculative modes of world-making, positioning artistic research as a space of critical imagination and ecological thought. Previously, Daniela served as chief curator at the MAC Austrian Museum of Applied Arts, Contemporary Art in Vienna, where she co-founded the MAC Center for Art and Architecture in Los Angeles. From 2000 to 2003, Daniela was the artistic director of the Künstlerhaus in Vienna and director of Einheim Forum Transeuropa. In 2024, she published The Laughter of the Jellyfish, a monograph that articulates a prefigurative antagonistic approach to artistic research and traces a genealogy of emergent countermethods. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to you, Daniela, again, for 50 minutes, and then please put your questions or comments in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. Daniela, welcome.
Well, thank you, Stephen. Thank you for your kind invitation. So Stephen had asked me to present 2 exhibitions. I selected 3, which is overly ambitious, and therefore I might run out of time. But what I really want to focus on and think with you is not only about the ecological impact and transformation that we're experiencing currently, but also about the different methodologies we can deploy as curators. And I thought 3 exhibitions give us a bit of a spectrum to investigate and discuss this question of methodologies. And obviously what links this exhibition is not just ecological in its broadest sense, but also this amnesia around it. And I'll speak about it, especially in regards to the first project, the amnesia, the forgetting, the invisibilization, but also the sort of political disavowal that we are experiencing, unfortunately. And I'll start with Territorial Agency, Oceans in Transformation, that I curated in 2020-21 at Ocean Space in Venice. It was commissioned by TBA 21 Academy, which is an arm, a research arm of TBA 21. And for those who don't know Territorial Agency, they are an architectural research studio working out of London, and founded by John Palmisino and Anne-Sophie Rønskog. And so this is Ocean Space at Campo San Lorenzo, doing one of the very frequent acqua alta that we have in Venice very often. And what is Ocean Space? So Ocean Space was founded by Francesca Thyssen-Bornemisza, who is the founder of TB21, sort of the head institution that is uniting all these initiatives, and the co-director, Marcus Raymond, as part really of a larger programmatic focus dedicated to sort of exploring the oceanic. So not just the ocean, but the oceanic. So all the sort of ways of knowing the oceans and the different disciplines that come together. And therefore, it was really important that the initiative be placed at the intersection of art, science, policy, conservation, advocacy, and of course, research. And it opened its doors to the public in March 2019 with a wonderful exhibition curated by my then colleague, Steffi Hessler, who's now in New York with you all, and by American artist John Jonas, amazingly prolific artist, who contributed this beautiful exhibition for the opening called Moving Off the Land 2. And while Moving Off the Land was really trying to sort of weave together an oceanic worldview through myth, through story, through poetics, but also through sort of the non-human world. The ambition of territorial agencies, Oceans in Transformation, was very different. The ambition there was to sort of try to tell the big story, not the big story sort of the transformation of the oceans occurring in the current moment. And so while you, in the first image, you had the sort of current Aqua Alta, what you see here with this sort of luminous line, and I don't know if you see my cursor, but this line sort of indicates the expected sea level at the end of this century or at the beginning of the next one, depending on our good behavior. And so as a visitor, you sort of literally entered, through the sort of future ocean level. And these are the main entrances, not the three gates, but mainly this is the one used by the public most often, to actually sort of give you a sense of this transformation. And what territorial agency is referring to is obviously sort of the climate research around the Anthropocene science, around Earth system science, around, if you want, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, ICPP, and they're kind of different data elaborations of the sort of future scenarios that are awaiting us. And also +1 degree Celsius, 2 degrees Celsius, 3 degrees. So these are the sort of scenarios that we know that we've been sort of receiving and understanding, but how to sort of visualize them was a bit the main question behind the beginning of the project. And I'll begin by showing you a few views of the exhibition, but before explaining to you what you really see. So here you're in the main nave. So you would just enter the main door of the church, San Lorenzo. And there are 30 screens that have been placed upright. And here, for instance, you can see 5 screens that are all interconnected with one visualization. Or here again, they're sort of different, well, I'll be explaining, different trajectories sort of moving through large geographical areas that want to sort of capture and give a sense of these transformations of the oceans in the Anthropocene. But maybe first, a bit of a background to sort of see what Oceans in Transformation is actually working perhaps against. And that has to do with this notion of amnesia or invisibilization that I was talking about initially. And to maybe start off, I always like to refer to an important filmic essay by Ellen Sekula and Noel Birch called The Forgotten Space. And if you remember, The Forgotten Space really argued that at the dawn of globalization, there was a sort of a deliberate and a systematic masking of the oceans, making it invisible, invisibilizing it for the purpose of veiling the incredible use and transformation of the ocean for economic purposes. And what Sekula was really looking at the time, mainly transport, shipment, but also the way how maritime working relationships were redistributed during sort of this dawn or at the dawn of globalization, but also, logistics and extraction, militarization, neocolonial relationships. And they called it the forgotten space because really it became sort of the terra nullius, the res nullius of globalization. And terra nullius is this very loaded concept that became the ideological grounding and also the legal network, the legal basis for coloniality, really, and for actually capturing land that was deemed to be unceded, that it was deemed to be unpopulated. And this same idea of sort of the terra nullius, and terra is a bit of an unfortunate term for the ocean, but of res nullius, was sort of repeated again in or during the sort of long stretch of modernity, literally to sort of mask what was happening in the ocean. And this situation really began to deteriorate very sharply at the beginning of the 2000s. So what we now have is not only shipping and logistics and transport and the things that I was mentioning before, but also we have, and that's a very important argument also within Territorial Agencies Project, we have the emergence of coastal cities that are all and they're not just coastal cities, but they're what we can call extreme coastal cities. So they are built within 100 kilometers of the shoreline, sort of in these areas that are really threatened by climate change and by sort of the rising sea level. And so you have this incredible vulnerability of these cities that all have been built, especially along the sort of Asian coastlines in the last 25, 30 years. And now it's home to about it's home to about 1 billion people. So it's an incredible amount of human life that's now been sort of located in areas where also very fragile ecosystems are being, of course, disturbed and so on and so forth. But not only that, we have the whole extraction not the whole, but a good part of the extraction industries, oil extraction, mineral extraction is happening on the shoreline. It's happening in these sort of economic zones. That what Keller Easterling is, well, not just her, but she's been examining it very closely, calls the sort of exclusive economic zones. We have deep sea mining. So now basically it's not just the shorelines, but we're now moving into the very depth of the ocean that's been privatized, that has been sort of sacrificed, the sacrifice zone of modernity, if you want, the same idea. And so basically, if you add to that the changing climatic conditions, so the wind patterns, the currents, the eutrophication of the ocean, overfishing, I mean, all these aspects that are actually altering the shape of the ocean, then we come to sort of this kind of conclusion of oceans in transformation, namely that this sort of heated, epoxic, acidified, not epoxic, anoxic, acidified ocean that we have now, that hasn't only changed, it has become a different ocean from the Holocene ocean. It's the Anthropocene ocean, what they call it. So really, the Anthropocene methodology is sort of at the key of what Territorial Agency is trying to propose here. But against this regime of invisibilization, against this forgetting of the oceans, Oceans in Transformation is really asking, how is this new ocean constituted, and how does it sense, how does it breathe, how does it react, how does it also remember and react? So if we consider the oceans no longer just as an ecosystem or as a body of water, but when we consider it as a sort of an intelligent kind of responding entity, if you want, for some, an elder or a kin, something that is actually considered as a living being of sorts, then the question is, how can we listen to it, and how can we translate what we hear, the sensorium of the ocean, into human understanding? And so this is really not a trivial task. And Clearly one that involves, a lot of data analysis, and that's how the methodology framework of the Anthropocene science works. So data is being sort of collected, mainly in the Ocean Transformation Project. It is publicly available data, which is also something that is very hard to get. Yeah? Data today is collected everywhere, but most of the data is privatized. And not only privatized, but it is fragmented in a sense that different disciplines are actually guarding their data. So atmospheric science is sort of studying atmospheric science data. That fishing experts are sort of looking at the transformation of shipping practices. People who are working with extractivism, they're sort of looking at the effects of extractivism and so on and so forth. But then how do you kind of bring this data together, and how do you kind of make them talk to one another, and how to make the disciplines behind the data actually sort of work together metaphorically? And so the method that we see here, or how territorial agency is approaching this question, is actually in designing or conceptualizing trajectories. And what you see here are two different trajectories. The one is the Metropolitan Asia one, and that's the one that I touched upon regarding the question of urbanization. And the second one is the Gulf Stream. And each trajectory has been designed in a way to analyze specific occurrences, specific events of transformation in these very vast regions, that both combine land masses and ocean mass. So it's not only looking at a section of the ocean, but kind of seeing what's happening in these sort of large areas. And here you have, for instance, you see the sort of indicators. You have whaling, you have transshipment activity, you have overshipping, you have the nuclear disaster of Fukushima. This is all on my left side, your right side probably, along the Gulf Stream, which is again very, very long. It goes from the Arctic all the way to, well, if you move it around, to the Gulf of Mexico, right? So here the geography is twisted. So it's really a way of bringing these sort of different indicators and these different events of transformation really together. And there's another way of representing the data, but in the trajectories, sort of in the animation that we have in the exhibition, we don't see those lines. You will only see sort of the micro events and micro transformations happening along these sort of large geographical regions with different inscriptions and data. And in the final rendering, you have sort of a popping up of these different terms along their occurrences. So I'll just let it run in the background. And so what kind of distinguishes these trajectories, these animations, from regular cartographic images, or maps, if you want, is that they actually try to not only capture these micro events, but also give a sense of the temporal transformations and the temporal transformation indicate also the different scenarios that we were talking about, the sort of plus 1.5 degree, 2 degree, 3 degree scenarios. So how to actually temporalize the transformation and give an image on how these things change and how sort of the variables of transformation can be made understood, in those type of visualizations. What I would like to do, maybe just for 1 second, and I know it's sometimes a bit, but I'd like you to watch the John Palmesino from Territorial Agency just for a second, because I think it would be good to hear him talk. Here, okay. Excuse me the glitch, but this is just a very...
Land, ocean, and sea. the atmosphere. So it's really difficult for a project that is focused on the oceans and transformation to only look at the oceans, because it's no longer possible to have that direct distinction. And in spite of the fact that we've emerged as cultures and civilizations out of the long period of stability of the Holocene, which is really demanding an understanding of the distinction between land and water, what we are facing today is an oceanic Anthropocene, an Anthropocene that is dominated largely by the changes in the energy system of the ocean. It's changes that are difficult to grasp in their magnitude, but they're even more difficult to grasp politically. So, for instance, if we follow a trajectory, trying to intercept along this trajectory the multiple changes that are occurring between West Africa and the Mid-Atlantic and the Amazon, we encounter a multiplicity of traces of the global supply chain that are, of course, reverberating with a very complex echo of imperialism and the triangular trade of enslaved people. And we are seeing very complex attempts to grasp the fact that the Mid-Atlantic has already warmed more than 3 degrees. It is creating a very complex greening of the sub-Sahara, which is then diminishing the aerosols that are transported by the wind, lifting the sand of the Sahara, and organizing the major nutrient for the Amazon. So we start seeing that in a place like COP, we talk about.
Okay, so I really wanted you to hear John. I'm now returning to my PowerPoint because, sorry, here we go. Because I think what he just says brings together a few really important conceptual findings. So more than just kind of the minutiae of the data and the animations that we see, but conceptually, I think what he's arguing, and I think that's really important, is that studying land and ocean in the Anthropocene must be epistemically and materially be seen as a continuous entity. There is no possibility of separating land and ocean. It is a continuum, and it's a continuum also held together, if you want, by the sort of interconnectedness of vast infrastructures of the technosphere. It's a very Latourian idea, if you want. But also what he's saying, and that's very important, is that the distributional patterns of these disturbances, right? Like these ecological patterns that he was referring to regarding the Amazon, that they're geographically displaced, which means that cause and effect are no longer local. They're non-local, right? So one thing that's happening in Europe, right, what's happening in along the Gulf Stream is causing the warming of Europe. And the warming of Europe is causing the desertification of North Africa. And that is really causing the greening of the Sahara, which then is impacting what's happening in the Amazon and so on and so forth. So these non-local kind of effects of anthropocenic transformations, and especially transformation occurring along the ocean. And lastly, I would say the third conceptual finding, which I find very important, is, and that's somehow challenging, which is really this idea of the one ocean, the one body of water. And scientists, and not just scientists, but also, scholars of the wet humanities like to say that, like there's one body of water, and that is correct, and that's true. But if you sort of take an Anthropocene sort of point of view, you have to realize that the oceans are actually multiple. You cannot no longer look at the ocean as a holistic entity, but they are extremely diverse in their manifestations, in their transformations, in their histories, in their ecologies, and also in the different communities that each depend and live in the ocean. So oceans are plural, it's oceans in transformation. And we have to sort of wrap our mind around the fact that this diversity also requires sort of different communities to sort of discuss and debate what's happening sort of along these axes of transformation. And just very briefly, the challenges, because Stephen asked me also to sort of look at questions of challenges. So to me, there's really two important questions coming from this project as a whole, and I hope I gave you a bit of an introduction to it. One really is the question of accessibility. No? So how do you actually make this overabundance of information embedded in the trajectories or embedded in the representation here? And I tried to sort of outline here a little bit what some of these, here we are, what some of these marks are meaning, like the pinkish red and the bluish area and so on and so forth. Yeah. And by the way, you always need to look at these animations in reverse. So what you see, the black thing is land, no? And the oceans are the sort of colored fields, because that's what we're sort of looking at more directly, right? So, but how do you make the sort of overabundance of information comprehensible? And how do you also create a sense for all this kind of jargon and this sort of Anthropocene language, that sort of circulates in these type of projects? And how do you make it understandable, both for obviously the general public, but also for specialists? You really want a project like that to offer the possibility for people to sort of debate, come together, bring these different scholars, researchers from the disciplines together, because as the project claims, they are very seldom sort of on the same table. And then a second challenge that I find very important is obviously comes almost paradoxically sometimes, with the question of big data visualization, and which really is big data offers a certain sort of bird eye view. It sort of looks or it offers a perspective that is sort of from the imperial high ground. Yet what the project really wants is to sort of offer certain counter perspectives, really foregrounding microhistories and the lived realities of people along these different sort of trajectories of the rapidly changing oceans. And so while the data has quite a high resolution in assembling these different layers of information, at the same time, there is something of this idea of the authority of objective truth claims that always comes with this sort of data visualization. And the last point I just touch upon, which is not something specific to the project, but when we embarked on the project, we were literally just 2 weeks before opening Oceans in Transformation, the COVID-19 pandemic broke out, and literally most of the things that we were planning were not able to come to fruition. So this is the second nave in the San Lorenzo Church. And what you see here is a big table, the tavola. It's called the table, which is this metaphorical table that I was talking about, that was supposed to bring the different scholars and polities together, kind of discussing the different projects and so on. Here, the chairs are nicely sort of separated, 2 meters distance and so on and so forth. But this tavola was actually meant to be populated by the so-called Ocean Fellows. So we initiated for this project a fellowship program of scholars and artists and ocean specialists that were supposed to reside in Venice for the duration of the exhibition, work on their own projects, but also mediating sort of the questions, issues, and bringing together sort of different groups in discussion around the themes of oceans in transformation. And while we started with the project and everything had to move online, clearly we were inviting those experts. We started these different studios of discussion, but we also realized that actually we had to take a more, I would say, coherent approach, a more systematic approach. So we established a platform that is now still running called the Ocean Uni, the Ocean University. that had a very elaborate curriculum. And this question of curriculum was really the one that sort of mattered to us mostly. So along the trajectory, what are the sort of curricular readings and knowledge practices that are important to assess both the sort of macro and micro histories that we wanted to tell, and who are not just the experts, but the philosophers, the poets, the ocean dwellers, the ocean lovers, the surfers, who are the different communities whose ocean we are actually sort of addressing through the project. And so I think, this sort of wraps up a little bit sort of these let's say educational or pedagogic experiment, wraps up a little bit the attempts of how we were trying to kind of bridge some of the challenges of the project, but obviously we offered also enormous amount of material, different dossiers online. We have a platform that is called the Ocean Archive. So that is really the sanctuary, so that brought together both the animations which were not accessible in the space. So we put them online, and it hosted also the different discussions held along this sort of then 2-year project, because we extended the exhibition into 2022, and finally we're able to open it to the public after the pandemic restrictions had elapsed. Okay.
All right. So just to say, as you asked me to remind you, it's
Yes.
now 9:30, so you have potentially 2 exhibitions to cover in 20 minutes or so.
Okay.
Good luck.
Thank you so much. Well, I knew it was going to be challenging. I'm trying to speak very fast, but maybe that's anyway. We'll do. I'll do the best I can. So Remedios was an exhibition that was presented at the Center of Contemporary Art, C3 in Cordoba. Cordoba is a city in Spain, which actually invited us for a 3-year collaboration, present parts of the collection in the city of Cordoba. So Remedios really translates into English as remedy, as repair, remediation, but also reparation or healing. And in a sort of more encompassing sense, you can also sort of say it included the idea of restitution, of reconstruction. And each of these terms are really important because they sort of signal different aspects of the project, sort of the repair of broken relations, the repair with the world, with the natural environment, with others, with other kin, with spirits, with historical trauma, with the wounds, with the wrongdoings of history, if you want, the repair of interrupted possibilities, of fragmentation, of polarization, how sort of our social fabric is being sort of torn apart. And so repair is really sort of a very complex term, but what helped me and something that to me remains sort of a guiding spirit in the whole project is a quote by Achille Mbembe, who actually wrote, and I'll read it for you in a second, who wrote, "The key question today is how life and the world in common can be repaired, reproduced, sustained, and cared for, made durable, preserved, and universally shared, and under what condition it ends." So despite the difficulties and the potential failures of repair, Mbembe really invites us very enthusiastically to what he calls sort of the imperative to reconstruct the world in common, right? And so this world in common, this is really where I wanted to start from sort of building the methodology. I found that maybe a methodology that could be helpful in addressing this world of common is the idea of a ceremony. Because ceremony is really a very old technology, if you want. It's common to humanity and yet culturally really specific. And what ceremonies do extremely well is to transmit knowledge, if you want, initiating its participants, into spiritual, ancestral, and also more than human wisdom. Ceremonies kind of really bring you into these spaces of gathering, but also allow forms of transformation, individual cosmological transformation. This is a question we're struggling with a lot in the area of sort of ecological thinking. So how do you make people transform sort of their knowledges and their cosmological vision, if you want? And obviously, ceremonies always sort of involve initiated experts. So you have shamans, you have priests, you have, in different traditions, mystics or witches and whatever. And what I love very much is a term that Federico Campagna uses. These initiates, they are sort of reality therapists. That's the term, you know. They sort of work on the fabric of reality in order to try to repair and to bring back these wounds and the lack of equilibrium, sort of to bring or to stabilize life, no? In again, what Memembe calls sort of in its imperishable form. So harmonization, bringing things back and so on. So the exhibition opened in the Holy Week or after the Holy Week, which is, as you might all know, in Cordoba, a huge celebration, and opened with a ceremonial procession by the artist and Yoruba initiate Courtney Morris. And I'll show you just very brief fragments of a video which involved a ritual offering to Yemaya, the Orisha of the sort of upper layer of the oceans. And here you sort of see of the ritual. So I'll stop for the sake of time. So what you see in this initial scene is Courtney as Yemaya leaving behind the old city of Cordoba with the Mesquita in the back, and now sort of entering the Roman bridge and kind of walking through with the big procession following her, with musicians and dancers walking through the city. And now the next scene, and that's very important, next scene, again, very briefly, since it's in Spanish, I'll introduce it. Here, she undergoes a transformation. So basically, she becomes another path, another camino, another manifestation of Yemaya. She becomes Yemaya Mayalevo, which is the sort of the angry mother, no? the wounded kind of soul. And she becomes also the personification, not just of that Yemaya, but of the wounding of the ocean and the wounding of the earth, and the disrespect. Yeah, that's really important. The disrespect that we humans sort of bring to her or against her in a certain way. Yeah? And she starts sort of yelling, so like, you know who I am? No, you have been mistreating me, you're abusing me. And I've been around sort of for eternal time, even before you existed. And I will teach you, how to respect your Mother Earth. Yeah? Again, very brief. That's good.
Tengo un mensaje de Yemaya para todos. Y escúchame bien. No deben creer que son más grandes que la tierra y que caminan. ¿Conocen a mí? ¿Saben quién soy? Todos me dicen el negro llorona, negro pero cariñoso.
Okay, you got an idea? So here she's sort of the angry mother, right? And there's a very, very, again, very short quote. What she writes is, when a plate falls or shatters, it is an expression of her displeasure and a warning to the devotee that she demands propitiation, sacrifice, and accountability. Mayalevo is a cleansing force who will cleanse the house and all of its inhabitants with her water. When her plates fall, the earth trembles and the ocean roars. Right? So, sorry, wrong one. And so the closing of the ceremony, it brings us inside of, well, maybe will not, I will mute it, but it brings us inside, and it's the closing, and that's why the piece is also called Bendición. So it's basically the assembling of the polity, the assembling of the processional participants of the ceremony, who then all get anointed and become sort of part of this kind of communal transformation experience. But why I also wanted to show this is because actually what you see here now is sort of one of the central pieces of the exhibition, which is a communal tent, a gathering tent, that is, maybe I show you the next image. Here we go. Here's a better image. That was designed and put together by the Brazilian artist Ernesto Neto, together with the Brazilian people of the Amazon called the Huniquin. So it's a collaborative work between them. And it's a tent that was commissioned by TBA21 and built and initially shown in 2015 in Vienna, called Basnepuru Chanayube. And it sort of has a really important ceremonial significance for the Huniquin, because what it actually does, according to Huniquin historiography, is that they're entering what they call the fifth age. And the fifth age is, in their sort of chronological worldview, is the age of reconciliation. It's the new contact with the non-indigenous world. And it has been visualized, and that's important, it's been visualized by the elders in their dreams, actually to lead to a healing and a repair of the broken world and the broken relationships. And so to the Huniquin, it's a calling, not it's sort of seeing things in your dreams, a calling to share their ancestral cosmologies, their culture, but also very centrally, their sort of healing wisdom with the world. And although they're very specific, not to the Huniquin, but basically their scope is planetary and sort of in solidarity against dispossession and against the violence against the earth. And so it was ceremonially enacted during the opening. We had the presence of Huniquins there, of some shamans, and we made a gathering, a healing gathering, sort of in the ceremonial tent, which was then also subsequently used throughout the exhibition, for various sort of pedagogical purposes and so on. And I guess I'm perhaps not going to speak to this last ceremony, but very briefly, this is a work of Brett Kellhammer called Bowery Nation, which is part of the TBA21 collection. And again, it's sort of a ceremonial parade, in this case of Katsina figures, little sort of Hopi spiritual figures. And they welcome the visitors at the entrance. So this is really the entrance to the exhibition. So you enter it and you sort of face this parade, which is sort of it's called Bowery Nation because it was conceived out of the Bowery. Brad is an American indigenous artist, but he doesn't know he's been adopted at a young age, so he doesn't know his descendants and his lineage or his particular lineage, but he has the ancestral dreams, he has the ancestral knowledge and the calling. So basically his world is always one of what he calls a third space between indigenous worlds and non-indigenous worlds, if you want. And that's really what his work is always about. It's kind of showing how he's a delinquent, he doesn't fit into anything. And Bowery Nation, as the nation of the Bowery people, in a way, is a rewriting, if you want, of Manhattan's history and so forth. So there's a couple of other images. there's a detail of this one. That project I'm not going to be able to show. All that maybe you need to know is we wanted to make a project with this beautiful Greenland that was just outside of the CICERE institution, and that had been abandoned for many, many years, and was part of the project that, again, initiated in the presence of many artists. This is Mexican artist Abraham Cruz Villegas, who made this beautiful collage. We inventorized the different sort of biological species and so on and so forth. And literally 2 weeks after the opening, this happened. The bulldozers were sent in, and the whole thing was turned into a parking space. So, sometimes the sort of ecological projects that you do part on are then being sort of destroyed. And then the worst part is it says solo turismo. So then becomes a parking space for tourists and is completely disengaged from the communal activity and so on. Okay. This was a second project methodology, sort of a ceremonial methodology, if you want, that we try to sort of enact in some of the works and so on and so forth. And this is sort of the last one that actually just opened in July of this year, so a couple of months ago, at the Museum Thyssen-Bornemisza, which is the museum that was founded and inaugurated by the father of Francesca Thyssen-Bornemisza, Hans Heinrich Thyssen-Bornemisza. And it houses, it's a national museum. The Spanish state has acquired the collection, and it houses sort of this collection of masterpieces, no, of Western art history. But they invited us, they invited TBA21, they invited me as a curator to bring together an exhibition that brings together, or that sort of combines the works from both collections. And the outcome is this project called Terraphilia, which translates as the love of the earth, in which we try to propose a specific reading. How much time do I have? 4 minutes? Okay, not gonna go anywhere. So it proposes a specific reading of how to sort of actually do that, no? How to reconciliate, maybe that's a word, historical collections with the contemporary collection, but actually rather than kind of working on the differences, I was trying to focus on what are maybe sort of communal points of entries through which we can describe the way worlds are constituted, worlds are dreamed, worlds are loved, worlds are being made. Yeah? And maybe these sort of world-making ideas and technologies, if you want, maybe they run across times and cultures. And maybe by sort of bringing them together, we can find points of commonality that allow us sort of to understand how these different worlds are made and put together. And I just use the last 3 minutes to show you and run through a couple of questions, through a couple of the spaces that show you how these compositions, these scenarios, if you want, looked like. Whereas you see here Kandinsky and you see Eduardo Navarro, Janaína Chepe. So this first space was dedicated to the animated world, the world seen as sort of an animated assemblage of living, non-living, biological human entities. Here we enter the second space, which was the space of dream, right? The art of dreams. So where dream becomes the powerful conduit to understand the world, to better understand, to gain more wisdom about the world, if you want. Yeah, that's still the world of the dreams. It's just not responding so quickly. Okay, the third space is the objective world, or the objectified world, which is the world that perhaps we know best, as it's been structured through, let's say, the forms of knowing passed down from the Enlightenment and rationality to our present day. But it's a world also that has been diffracted. No, it's a world that's kind of always supposed to be very fragile, but actually it's fragility, or this solidity. Sorry, it's a world that's supposed to be very solid, but actually it's fragmented. No, it's never been as solid as it pretended to be. So this glow by olefrolius kind of signals this diffraction of this world. This is terra inferma. No, it's the wounded earth. It's the unstable earth, where earth and the connection of to the earth and to the land, and the relation to land sort of becomes the main conduit to sort of building this world and the imaginaries around this world. Again, with Brett Kalhammer. Okay, I'm not going to go. That's the space of the myth, right? So it is actually called, the chapter is called The Return of the Time of the Myth. So the cyclical return of mythical times, and what the function of these mythical returns are in specific moments. You see sort of some images from here. That's the space of the ocean. So as we know, life has been created out of the oceanic, again, with different Yoruba deities that sort of convene here. This is the second part of the animated world. And here we're ending with the sort of last installation, which is a juxtaposition of a moche vessel, that is 1,500 years old, with a digital animation from Daniel Stigman. Thank you very much.
Okay. Before we get to, I see that there are only a couple of questions at this point. Could you just for a moment summarize, since, for the class, you had told us that there is a trilogy here of exhibitions. Could you summarize the relationship of the three exhibitions, since we haven't really had a chance to look at them?
Okay. So the three exhibitions are sort of meant to, create correspondences among them. The first one was called Abundant Futures. So we propose to sort of look at the terms of at the term of abundance against scarcity. Sort of scarcity, which again is been passed down both politically and ideologically as something that the world, or the resources of the world, are being sort of limited, and therefore scarcity is kind of what regulates human worlds. And we said, well, maybe not. No, maybe multiplicity, maybe diversity, maybe abundance is actually sort of the generative motive of life as such. And so the abundant future is a future of abundance, in which this sort of multiplicity can be refound, right? And perhaps said differently, maybe this conception of living in a world of scarcity has actually caused a lot of damage, both sort of spiritually, emotionally, and politically, sort of to the people of this planet. So the second one was Remedios, and each exhibition had 2 iterations. So we planned them for a whole year, but within 6 months, we then changed, a large portion of the works within the exhibition, and tried to sort of reconstellate the works within each of the chapters. So the second one was the exhibition Remedios, and the third one, which is probably the most difficult one, was the final exhibition, and it's called The Ecologies of Peace. So where we were sort of analyzing a bit also through a lot of works, and of course in the background of the ongoing wars and military activities that had surged at that time. So what is really peace, and how does peace relate to war, and what are sort of the going definitions, and how can we maybe intervene also in creating a different imaginary of peacemaking, both with the world, but among people and among nations. I cannot hear you right now, Stephen. You're muted.
Once again, sorry. So there are a couple of questions. Well, first is a simple one. Can the videos be viewed on YouTube from the exhibition? Yeah.
Wait, the one Oceans in Transformation is on Ocean Archive, yes. Bendición, no. That is a work that cannot be viewed, unfortunately. So yes, only in transformation.
All right. So first question, both of these exhibitions play with an expanse of time from ancestors and elders to future reality. How do you relate to time in your work?
Well, it depends. It really, I think, again, it's a question of methodology or methodological framing and response to each of the questions you're raising. No, sometimes time needs to be extremely specific because it politically demands you to be specific, right? You might not be able to open the lens too much because then things become too confusing. And so specificity is what is required. Sometimes when you sort of maybe look at more macro events, then it is quite useful to see time as something that can be negotiated, where there is a certain linearity that has been agreed upon, I guess, or imposed, or however you want to call it, and kind of disturbing this linearity might not be that difficult and quite useful in kind of understanding relationships that are ancestral to us, right? Or important. I'm also, when I use these terms, ancestrality, whatever, I again, sometimes I'm super specific, and I mean, that's the ancestrality of this people, of this nation, of this family. And sometimes I use it more sort of as a motif to also say, well, most of what we consider today ancestrality actually is the result of reinventions. So the same, for instance, with the Hunikuin, they had to reinvent their ancestral traditions because at the end of the sugar plantations, they were both, I mean, on one hand, they were decimated to 300 individuals. They barely survived as a nation, and they were divorced, of their sort of ancestral tradition. So they had to dream them again. They had to reconquer them. No? They had to sort of reinvent tradition. And so, tradition are both, or ancestrality can also mean different things in different contexts.
I mean, I suppose it's also the case, though, that you're, in a purely curatorial way, you're bringing together objects that come from different temporalities and times, just as in that last image that you showed between an ancient artifact with a video behind it. So those are from two different times, two different cultures, two different histories, and two different temporalities, just in terms of the objects themselves.
And yet they speak of very similar things. And I think that is the beauty of sometimes this sort of transhistorical kind of juxtaposition. So because you see that the sort of animating intelligence of the little panther that we didn't see because the image wasn't very good, but a little panther that sort of roams in this Amazonian forest in Danny Steegman's, it's not even a video, it's actually a live render, no? So the panther inhabits the space and sort of walks around and but it's not too different from this sort of moche vessel, no? That's sort of symbolically meant to represent this animal and animate intelligent and sort of hold it and pass it on, through generations.
Okay. So Urja says, thank you. It was wonderful to hear about your curatorial practice. Could you share some of the influences, both personal and theoretical, that have shaped your approach over time? Large question.
Ooh. Well, it depends. It really depends on what area we're sort of looking at. Yeah, but I think what I've been most invested in the last couple of years is really how to sort of open up and disrupt sort of our knowledge systems, and in a way basically say, for I don't know, last 200 or 400 or 500 years, this is how we Western white person as I am, define knowledges, and why not kind of throw that in the air and then for 200 years, kind of let 1,000 ways of knowing be manifest, right? And then after 200 years, we can still decide whether it was a good idea or not. I mean, I'm saying it sort of a little bit playfully, but to me, that is sort of the important idea. Is like, also always kind of in most of the projects I try to do is try to sort of disarm a little bit the sort of categorical imperative that sometimes comes with, like opening like, what does it mean to have ancestral knowledge? What does it mean to have that? It's not out of disregard, but disarming to me means engaging with it emotionally, emphatically, building upon, standing on the shoulders of those that came before us, and sort of looking into the new horizon, and kind of trying to see what's out there, and we don't know because we're sticking our heads out, right? And perhaps somebody just got to grab it. So this said, like there are so many people. I mean, so speaking of the ocean, Astrina Naimanis, her Bodies of Water, right? Such an incredibly influential book, or Achille Mbembe, as I said, right? Like whenever it's, I think about post-colony, and post-colony, it sounds so threatening again, but it's so much again about sort of the possibility of repair, of sort of creating these worlds in common, but also, of course, other writings that he has. Posthumanism, I think again, do I really fully believe in posthumanism? I wouldn't say so, but I love the sort of critical potential. I love the fact that it sort of offers us a turning away from ways of seeing the animal world and the non-animated. And it's like, let's use that language, let's use it productively, let's propose it, and then again, let's see what comes of it. Do I believe really that that I don't know, my dog is my kin? Yeah, why not? Like, but like, what to do with these propositions? I like to work with them. I like to engage with them. I don't think the believing is really what is necessary in this context, but is actually to engage with them and to take them seriously, and to stop this kind of critical distancing, from things that sort of seem a bit funny. And I've done a lot of projects, including, for instance, the project with Ernesto Neto and the Huni Queens, that seemed extremely problematic at the time of their doing. And then, you look at them like 5 or 10 years later, and there's sort of a whole array of sort of projects and exhibitions that kind of, march along. So I'm not sure this was a very good answer, but I'm just trying to somehow not give you a list.
Okay, since we're a bit after, there's one more comment question. The nullification of the space of growth that was flattened to become the car park for the tourists, were there no objections? And were any new ceremonies conceived by an angry mother, in capital letters, to repair that scarring of the earth?
Well, there was a lot. There was a lot happening. Absolutely, yes. So both from the side, from the part of the neighbors, whose land it really was that was dispossessed, because what I had told and shared you that this, what they call a descampo in Spanish, it's in English it translates as a wasteland, as a rural land. It was part of sort of a real estate bonanza that had then been aborted after 2008, 2009, the economic crisis in Spain, and so on and so forth. It was supposed to be a big convention center that was then never built, and so then it was a public space. It was a space available to the public, and the young youth of the neighborhood gathered there, and they had their fests and ceremonies and whatnot, and that basically a fabric of life that was created there was completely disrupted. And the project that we wanted to do wasn't really to convert it into agrarian land, but actually to do exactly that, to keep it as a bio reserve, right, or a biodiversity reserve for the community, but also, and that's sort of an idea behind the project, I was kind of playing and experimenting with the idea of what happens if museum institution and cultural institutions adopt these kind of lands, adopt them in terms of their conservation effort, which is all introvert, which is all targeted to the objects inside the institution, and the outside remains the sort of wasteland of parking. So what if there's a sort of an adoption that safeguards it for the public and for the communities? And so that's part of it. And yes, so basically Abraham Cruz Villegas make this one beautiful collage, which is a collage of I don't know, 20, 30 pages that was also supposed to raise money, by selling it very cheaply, but still, allowing us to sort of generate funding for it, and so on and so forth. And along with a group of artists that conceived of the project called Plata, they're from Cordoba, we kept sort of working over the course of 2 years to kind of, resituate, some of the aspects of the project.
Okay, with that, we will end. Thank you so much, Daniela, for the public presentation. And now we will switch to the conversation with the students. For the audience, thank you so much for attending. Next week, we'll have Philippe Birot, who will speak to us, I believe, from Frankfurt. So thank you, Daniela.
Thank you so much. Thank you.